What is up? Good morning and welcome to Mock It Like It's Hot. The NFL draft is just under 2 weeks away. In fact, 2 weeks from today, we will be waiting for round 4 to start. It is an exciting time. Everybody has the rookie fever, and that is why we are going to do another rookie draft today. But this one is of the one quarterback variety. The draft room is full. Everybody's waiting. Let's get started. Good morning and welcome to Mock It Like It's Hot, Club Fantasy's weekly mock draft show. I am your host, Ryan Weisse. With me, as always, Austin Amandolia. Austin, how are you doing this morning, my good friend?
I'm hanging in there. Nate pointed out the Braves cap on the pre-show, and it's a little bit of a rough day for Braves fans because officially Spencer Strider's out for the season. So
yeah, our buddy Gator J just announced that too. I don't know if he is also a Braves fan. I know he's from down that way. So yeah, not a great day for Braves Nation right now.
Nope, but to make up for it, we get to talk rookies, so that's good.
Exactly. We'll talk about the round ball at a later time. It's all about the oblong pigskin at this point. Our guest today, I have known in this industry for a very, very long time, but I'm also easily going to say, Nate, you might be my busiest guest so far because your byline has so many damn companies on it right now. So introduce yourself, Nate Polvogt. How are you this morning?
I'm doing great. I'm sorry about your loss, Austin, but let me put it into perspective. I'm a Rockies fan.
Oh,
we start the season in last place in spring training. So I feel your pain, but at least you have a decent team around it. I'm doing great, guys. I'm ready to mock draft. Like you said, I do a ton of stuff around this industry, but I love it. It's fun. It's my full-time gig, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Hopefully in another month or so, I'm going to have a pretty big announcement about something brand new coming. It's kind of a big deal, but when it's time to announce, it's time to announce. But
I will invite you back to do another show post announcement so we can talk about it. I'm always looking for guests who can do a Saturday morning with me. So you have an open invite. We'll talk more about that after you make your announcement. I do like to get the show started by letting everybody know where they can find your work. So if you have any big projects you're working on right now, let them know where they can find it.
Really right now, most of what you're going to find is my featured writer stuff on Fantasy Pros, and you can find me on Razzball every other week, usually for Dynasty Diehards. And then I've got my rankings over on Razzball as well, my full Superflex Dynasty rankings.
There you go. All right, guys, let's go ahead and start talking about this draft. As mentioned, a 1 QB draft this time around. We have 10 teams in the draft room. We have it's a correct rookie draft this time, Austin. No third round reversal, no accidental serpentine. So I fixed all the mistakes before they happened. But as mentioned, 1 QB, and that can change ADP greatly. I'm going to go ahead and get the draft started, and then we will talk a little bit about fantasy football. All right, Austin actually took the 101. So while Austin is picking, I'll actually go ahead and break down who's drafting with us today. So we have Austin at the 101. Lemron Jakes. I think there was a play on LeBron James there. Lemron Jakes, Brocal, Rynum, our buddy Kevin Du Bois is picking at 5, 1 pick ahead of Nate Polvogt, who is picking at 6, Astro Dabber at 7, Matt DeVito at 8, Gator Raiders at 9, and Odwar at 10. Quick rundown for anybody who's not watched Mock It Like It's Hot before. We do not recap the entire draft. We're not going to talk about every team and every pick. That's not what this is about. This is about learning through mock drafting, looking for trends, looking for interesting picks. Austin and Nate will talk about their drafts at the end of the draft, and if there was a particularly egregious pick, I will pick the oops of the draft. So Austin's on the clock. Austin takes Marvin Harrison, but that's not what we're going to get started talking about. Nate, me and Austin had 1 QB draft about 2 weeks ago. And I like to have our guest point out, where do you see the major differences between 1 QB and Superflex? I find it pretty interesting that Superflex has kind of taken over the Dynasty landscape.
Really, Superflex has taken over the Dynasty landscape, right? 15 Dynasty leagues, they're all Superflex. I don't have a single 1 QB Dynasty league. Now, to that, with Superflex taking over, you're right. It really does change the way you draft, both in startups and in rookie drafts. All of a sudden, because you have the opportunity to start 2 quarterbacks, you put a premium on that position. So you're maybe going to see people in drafts like this take a stab on a guy like Joe Milton in the 4th or 5th round, or in a Superflex draft, whereas in this draft, Joe Milton shouldn't come off the board, right? Because the chance that he even gets a starting job in the first 2 seasons is slim to none. If you've seen him play and you've read anything about him, So I think that's going to be the biggest difference. QBs come at a premium in the Superflex leagues, whereas here, I mean, are we going to have a QB come off the board in the first 10 picks? We might not. It just depends on roster construction and how people feel about, Caleb Williams and Drake May and JJ McCarthy and Jaden Daniels.
I always talk about the great part of having really, really smart guests on the show, but the bad part of having really smart guests on the show is you take away my material for later on, because I do want to see where Caleb Williams goes, and I'm going to ask you guys about it. And my arch frenemy is in the chat, Kevin. He's drafting with us and just said, my boomer ears hate hearing that one QB is dying, and he's not wrong. Austin, because I've heard you talk about, the major differences between one QB and Superflex before, one thing I was going to have you talk about today is I find it interesting that the Dynasty community has latched onto Superflex, but not so much the redraft community. Redraft, I feel like, at least for 90% of the people, a large portion of the people, has really stuck to their ways of one quarterback, two running backs, three wide receivers, tight end, flex. And nobody really talks about Superflex. I have a friend who loves fantasy football and abhors any talk about switching to a Superflex draft.
Yeah, I think there's something to the scarcity of quarterbacks and redraft that makes people, not want to be stuck with the same quarterback perpetually. And at the same time, there's this weird dynamic where there's both scarcity at the elite end of the quarterback, and the quarterback is so deep. So for the Dynasty, the Diehards, quarterback is deep enough that top 10 quarterbacks may rarely get traded, right? Somebody may get Josh Allen, and they will have Josh Allen on their roster forever.
Yeah.
Until he retires.
My first rookie pick in a Dynasty was Josh Allen, and he is on my roster. I have no intentions of moving.
Right. And so if you're a player that likes to trade or likes to have different types of lineups, that could be boring at some point, right? After 5 years of just not having to worry about quarterback, you're like, man, I really miss figuring out what new quarterback is going to break out. But I'm not getting rid of Josh Allen. I'm not going to do that. So I need a second quarterback. I think there's just something there stylistically, like it keeps some of the trades going with the quarterback position. Whereas in redraft, every draft is different. Every year is different. You have an opportunity to gain an advantage with that one quarterback.
And Nate, as I alluded to, that you alluded to my next question, I wanted to know where you would even consider a quarterback in a one quarterback league, all based around where were we going to see Caleb Williams go. And Kevin took him at the 1-5, one pick ahead of you. I imagine based on you saying, will we even see a quarterback go in the first 10 picks, you would not have taken Caleb Williams there. So when do you consider quarterback in a one QB rookie mock, looking at Caleb Williams, just specifically talking about this year? Is there a specific spot where you're like, okay, he's too good for me to go wide receiver?
That would probably be if he came around to me in the second round. So, I mean, if I had an early second round pick, I'd probably take him there. Now that also, the thing is Ryan and Austin, we know that this comes with a little bit of context, right? Because if I'm sitting in this rookie draft and I've got Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson as my two quarterbacks on my Superflex team, or on my one quarterback team, if I've got Josh Allen, if I've got Lamar Jackson, see, we all get so stuck in Superflex here.
Yep.
But if I've already got a marquee quarterback, I'm not going to touch Caleb Williams because I know I've got 3 or 4 more seasons out of Lamar Jackson. Why would I waste the draft capital on a quarterback, right? And now that said, if I need a quarterback, I might reach in the first round. I don't know. It all depends on situation, how the draft's going. Do I think he's going to come back around to me? Do I think one of these other quarterbacks is going to fall?
I love that you brought up how situational this is. This is something we like to point out on this show all the time. 2 major differences between mock drafting Dynasty and actually playing Dynasty. 1, you can't trade picks. If you ever enter a Dynasty draft where all 10 teams own their own picks for all 5 rounds, leave that Dynasty. That is a terribly boring league that you want nothing to do with. No pick trading. But the other thing that Nate pointed out is we don't have a roster to base this off of. In one of my one QB dynasties, I have Patrick Mahomes. Like Nate said, there are no quarterbacks on my draft board. It's just not happening. I have Mahomes. I'm not worried about a backup. Kevin has dove deep into his role this week, and he says his make-believe quarterbacks are Drew Lock and Geno Smith. He needed Caleb Williams, Austin.
There you go.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a scenario where you should definitely reach for Caleb Williams if those are your two quarterbacks in a 1 QB league. But I agree with Nate. It really depends on context. We can talk all we want. This is a shot at Gator J. Sorry, Gator J. This is coming. We can always talk, draft value instead of situation. I think Caleb Williams is probably going to be a better player than Xavier Worthy and Brian Thomas. But if I don't need a quarterback there, I would rather take the wide receiver depth.
Yep. I think that's a completely fair point. Now, a few weeks ago, you said we had you and Joel on the show, and you both kind of agreed Caleb Williams falls around that 5-6 range. Do you still feel that way? Because obviously we may not know how we feel about, Xavier Worthy, Brian Thomas, things like that. But we talked about the 3 wide receivers. We talked about Brock Bowers. He goes 5 in this draft. I know you're a big fan of A.D. Mitchell, and we're going to talk about him a little bit later. But do you still kind of stand to your in a vacuum 5-6 is about the right place for Caleb Williams?
Yes, in a vacuum, I do feel that way. I have him ranked 6th in my overall 1 quarterback league rankings, just behind Brian Thomas. And honestly, it's so close that I'm like, I could see ranking him above Brian Thomas. And some of that's similar to the NFL draft. Quarterbacks get a little bit of a premium on them because of how impactful they can be in terms of their ranking. But would I draft consistently Caleb Williams at the 5 slot? Maybe not.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Early preview of my oops of the draft. It's already done. It's already set in stone because it leads right into my next question, Nate. Do any other quarterbacks belong in round 1? Because I'm just going to quickly recap round 1. I normally don't do this early. Marvin Harrison, Malik Neighbors, Rome Odunze, Brock Bowers, Caleb Williams, as we expect. Xavier Worthy, Brian Thomas. This is going to come down to flavor and what you like. But then Jaden Daniels, Jonathan Brooks, and Drake May are the next 3 picks to close out round 1. Nate, do Jaden Daniels and Drake May belong anywhere near round 1 in a 1 QB league? Oh, Nate, I think you're muted. You're quiet.
I am sorry. I've got a kid kicking around in the basement.
Oh, you're absolutely fine. I go through 5 different screens, so when it's silent, I get nervous that my internet died. So I was like, what is going on? But anyway, do these second and third quarterbacks belong in round 1? I'm going to guess your answer is no, because Caleb Williams doesn't belong in round 1 in your book sometimes.
So and again, this is all very situational. It all depends on what your team looks like, what your league scoring looks like.
No, let's talk about that, though. So let's go on the assumption these teams need quarterbacks, because why the fuck else would you take a quarterback that early? Do these 2 guys still belong in round 1, or is it worth waiting to round 2 to grab JJ McCarthy or one of the other guys?
I don't think Drake May should be in the first round. I don't care where he lands. I don't care what his situation is. He shouldn't be here in the first round. Now, Jaden Daniels, if he ends up in Washington, which we're hearing more and more, it's sounding like that might be what happens. I really like that situation for Jaden Daniels. So if that does happen, I think I'm okay with him going in the first round of a 1 QB draft. Rookie. If you need a QB and it makes sense for the situation, I'm okay with it.
So Austin and I, if you've tuned into any of our rookie stuff, cannot agree on Drake May. I will say, Austin, I've went back since we've started fighting and watched more Drake May tape. And he's not Daniel Jones. He's not Mitch Trubisky. There is much more to his game than you're ever going to get for these guys. I'm not helmet scouting Drake May at all. I don't trust his decision-making yet, but I see the intangibles that you see. I see a big-ass runner who could be Josh Allen, which we didn't know Josh Allen was Josh Allen until he was Josh Allen. So that's a bad comparison, but it could happen. I see what you see, but there are just things that scare me that I think he's way more landing spot dependent than, say, Jaden Daniels or Caleb Williams.
Yeah, I just disagree. I mean, I think there's a lot to Jaden Daniels' game that also just really scares me. He takes some dang hits. So I do worry about health for him with his body size. Not necessarily his height, but his weight makes me a little bit nervous if he's taking some of those hits. And Drake May, I feel like the thing about Drake May is that people underestimate his athleticism. He can run the ball. He can escape the pocket. He's just doing everything he can to work from the pocket. The other thing that finds me interesting about May that makes me feel comfortable with him, regardless of landing spot, he was actually calling the offense. He was making adjustments at the line of scrimmage. You don't see college quarterbacks do that often.
Usually not even allowed.
Yeah, they usually have to look to the side and be like, hey, what are we doing here? Drake May, he's over there. He's reading protections out, which is going to significantly help his transition into the NFL.
And like I said, I'm starting to see the good. So I don't think he's going to get out of my QB4 spot, but I will say he's likely to move up the board where I'm going to show him a little bit more respect in the overall. Guys, I had another question I was going to ask you about the top 3 wide receivers. They were the first 3 picks off the board. Everybody knows about the top 3 wide receivers. So I'm actually going to jump into some of our listeners' questions right now. And first and foremost, before we jump into those, if you're new to the show, please just go hit subscribe. If you're watching us on Twitter right now, Josh has the link. You can just click YouTube, go over, hit subscribe. We just crossed 800 followers. We are pushing hard for 1,000 before the season starts. We appreciate each and every one of you. We do these shows every week. We do 5 shows a week. You're going to get your bang for your $0 from Club Fantasy. So let's get into some of these dynasty questions, guys. And pardon me while I cover your faces up. Astro, who I believe may have drafted with us in the past, 10-team Superflex. He's going to start 10. It is tight end premium. He traded away Amon-Ra for DJ Moore and 2 2025 first. What do we think of next year's class, and what do we think of that trade, Nate?
I like the trade.
I love the trade. I just want to throw that out there. So.
Yeah, well, I like DJ Moore, and you're adding Caleb Williams to that offense. I think it's going to be a dynamic offense, especially with Keenan Allen now. I think that makes a huge difference. I think that's going to help free DJ Moore up a little bit because teams are now going to have to focus a little bit more on Allen. And now, as far as next year's draft class, I'm going to be honest, I don't know that much about it yet.
Nor I.
Yeah. So what I have heard is it's going to be about the same as this year. But you know what? We don't know anything about it yet because there are players who are going to declare that we don't know of yet. There are going to be injuries. There's going to be players who fade this season that maybe we're really high on now that we're not going to be so high on come draft time next year. So we'll see what happens. But for the now, I think this is a good trade.
I think it's safe to say Ohio State and LSU will probably have a good wide receiver in next year's draft. So
yeah, that's probably a given.
I know there's a really good kid at Ohio State right now. I don't know who he is because that's not who I am as a person, but I know there is a good kid there. Austin, I love this trade because DJ Moore is not old by any stretch of anyone's imagination. So you didn't take a huge step backwards at wide receiver, and you pulled 2 2025 first to not take that huge step backwards.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a really great trade. And it's Egbuka that you're looking for on Ohio State. Yes. He should be pretty good. He's not, Marvin Harrison, but he will be a solid receiver to come out next year. And as Kevin points out in the chat,
let's get an expert in here. Kevin says next year's draft is exceptionally solid at wide receiver and running back. Now, I think this league was super flex 2 tight ends. So hopefully you don't need a quarterback. I'm sure there will be quarterbacks that pop up on the board eventually.
Yeah. And to that effect, I mean, one guy that I was really hoping was going to come out this year who did not come out this year was Travion Henderson, the Ohio State running back. A lot of Ohio State guys that I like. So I like, you could probably get him in next year's class, depending on whenever that draft is. If you're looking for a quarterback next year, yes, literally what Kevin was about to say. Not so sure about the quarterback class next year.
There we go. I like that. Guys, if you've never tuned into our show before, the draft goes on in the background. We will eventually spend more time on the draft. But for the draft is just to give us some interesting topics to talk about. And instead, our listeners are doing that today. So the next question is from Scampers. I'm going to assume this is probably a Superflex question. If you had Stafford and no, because Caleb Williams is the one in the Superflex regardless. So let's say in 1 QB, if you're sitting with Stafford and Brock Purdy, Nate, does that get Caleb Williams into your round 1? Or is Purdy good enough to bump Caleb Williams to round 2 for you? Oh, you're muted again, bud.
Yeah, I'm taking Caleb Williams here. Okay. Pretty easily. And here's why. Matthew Stafford's at the back end of his career, right? He keeps pulling out these really good seasons, but we don't know when that's going to end. When's the fall off? Could be this year. And Purdy, as fun as it has been to watch him, you're kind of starting to see a little bit of the cracks in his game. So we don't know what's going to happen with Brock Purdy either. And Caleb Williams, yeah, he's a risk. He's going to Chicago, and we thought Justin Fields was a can't-miss prospect, and look what happened there. They traded him to Pittsburgh to be essentially a backup to Russell Wilson. But I'm willing to take the risk on Williams in this situation. First round, as long as it's not a top 2 or 3 pick, yeah, I'll take Caleb.
And Austin, you were already willing to take Williams in round 1. So I guess how high would you go? Are the three, if this is your quarterback room, are the 3 wide receivers and Bowers going ahead of Williams for you?
Yes, I still don't care. Those guys are so good that I'm going for the 4 of those ahead of Caleb Williams, even with Stafford and Purdy, just because the 2 of them, they give you enough of a floor that it's not going to be to your detriment to have that slight downgrade at quarterback. But having a receiver like Marvin Harrison could be what you need to change the game, change the calculus for your league that next year.
Nate, it just kicked you over into an auto pick. No big deal because it's a mock draft, but you'll want to turn off auto pick before you.
Yeah, it's funny because I was gonna take Theo Johnson anyway, so that worked out.
That's awesome. I love Theo Johnson, and I'm glad to meet someone else who loves Theo Johnson.
When I'm listening to your riveting conversation, I forget to make my pick, and it makes the right one for me.
That's how it goes. I love it. All right, we're going to get into the draft after one last question because I think this is the best question. We have actually talked about this for about a month straight, Calvin, and I'm going to be interested to hear what Nate says. A guest last week changed my mind on this. He is in need of a quarterback in Superflex, but wants to take Marvin Harrison Jr. at 101, Nate. Is this a high crime? Should he be taking Caleb Williams, or is it okay to make that pivot?
Okay, so I'm going to assume that you're saying you still haven't drafted, right? So it's probably going to be post NFL draft that you're doing this.
Yeah, I assume most of these, would be after we know landing spots and all that stuff.
So here's what I'm going to say. If Marvin Harrison Jr. ends up a New England Patriot, or he ends up a Los Angeles Charger, do not take him at 101. Those are 2 really just terrible situations for him that really concern me. Not that the talent's not there, because we know the talent's there and he'll still eat, but it's not going to be that 101 caliber. But if he ends up anywhere else, yeah, take him at 101 because he's probably going to have some sort of Justin Jefferson type season.
Austin, we asked this exact question in our Superflex draft like last week of Jeremy. And it was my question. As everybody knows, I started this show to help myself do better in fantasy football. And so we had Jeremy on. I am in a situation where I actually liked my quarterbacks. Jeremy did not. But I have Jordan Love. I have Will Levis. And then I have Geno Smith as kind of like that third QB fill-in. And I really wanted to go Marvin Harrison at 1. And Jeremy basically explained to me that I should not do that. I should take Caleb Williams because with other picks that I have in the first round, I can land some decent wide receiver talent. Austin, did Jeremy convince you last week this situation where someone needs a quarterback? Are you okay with Marvin Harrison at 1?
Yes, I'm still okay with it. I was not convinced just because I think there's a good chance that Marvin Harrison, even Malik Neighbors, they could be Justin Jefferson level talent. And I'll tell you right now, when you have Justin Jefferson on your team, when you have Jamar Chase on your team, you always have a chance. And that's the thing that I'm looking for with these 2. I'm also starting to contemplate deploying a strategy where I take Marvin Harrison at the 101 and I trade picks for the quarterback that I want. If I am in a quarterback needy team, I'm trying to trade for that quarterback instead of taking Caleb Williams at the 1 spot. Also because if I'm in a space right now, which I am in a space right now on our club Dynasty league, I have no chance of winning this year. I have no chance of winning next year. I have a great chance of having the 101 next year because I have the first pick of the team that I expect to be the worst team next year. Sorry, Michael Scully. So I want to take...
He bought into a dumpster fire.
He did. I want to take Marvin Harrison and over the next 2 years, trade my assets around to get a quarterback that I know is going to be good instead of taking my most valuable pick I'm probably ever going to have for the next 3 years on a quarterback that may or may not pan out because we know how volatile quarterbacks can be, regardless how good of prospects they are.
Oh, man. Now you got me thinking again because I have 7, 9, and 10 and could land a ancillary quarterback or 2 later and walk away with Marvin Harrison. So once again, I'm waffling and don't know what the hell I'm going to do. Guys, let's talk about the draft a little bit. We already broke down round 1. Let's talk about 2. AD Mitchell goes to Austin, Troy Franklin to pick 2, which I think was auto picks this whole draft. Let's throw that out there. JJ McCarthy at 3, Ladd McConkey at 4, Jalen Wright 5, Trey Benson 6, Xavier Leggett 7, Ricky Pearsall 8, Javon Baker 9, and Blake Corum at 10. 10. That's basically the last rundown. I'm going to do the rest of this. I try to have it big enough on the screen that you guys can see it. So the question I like to ask here, Nate, is in the first 2 rounds of a 1 QB league, other than the quarterbacks who you and I are both agreeance of, but let's take a look at these wide receivers and running backs. Is there anybody who doesn't belong in round 2 that was just a reach? You're muted.
Man, it's just been one of those mornings.
It's okay.
You know, the only one I'm surprised to see fall into this. Well, there's 2 I'm surprised to see in the second round here. And so apparently the community's coming around to where I was on these guys. Lad McConkey and Xavier Leggett. Really pleased to see that they've moved up a little bit.
Okay.
I'm glad they should be in this round.
No, okay. You threw me off because I thought you were saying they didn't belong here. I was like, that's getting spicy.
No,
okay.
No, I'm saying that they do, and I'm glad that they've moved up into this tier because it's where they should be. All around, I think that the value in this round is pretty solid. I don't think there's anybody I would say that shouldn't be here right now.
Oh, that's a perfect answer. And obviously,
it's an interesting. I have issues, but I got nothing here.
Yeah, I like most of these guys as well. Austin, this actually lends itself perfectly to something I was going to bring up. I was looking at our rankings this morning to prep questions for the show, and you and I have a very different opinion on Blake Corum specifically, but honestly, the running back class in general. You tend, at least this class, to not have the running backs very highly rated in your 1 QB rankings, but Blake Corum jumped off the board at me because right now, when I was looking at my board, he falls in as my 12. So early pick in the second round. You have him as 31, an early pick then in the 4th round in a 10-team league. He goes at the end of the second round here. How do you feel about Blake Corum? I guess in general, what has you so low on him?
Yeah, so some of this is like about the running back class because he is my RB9. So he's still in my top 10 running backs in this draft, but the running backs just don't jump off the page for me. So the reason I'm down on Blake Corum, I have him ranked so low. Part of it's because there are so many more receivers I would rather take a dart throw on. So in my rankings, some receivers I have ahead of Blake Corum, Malik Washington, really like him. A guy that Nate just brought up, Xavier Leggett, I like. I also Malachi Corley ahead of him. Like, these are guys that I would rather take the dart throw on than Blake Corum. And part of that's because I feel like Blake Corum is just very boomer bust. To me, he's going to get exactly what is blocked for him. He's going to get 3 to 4 yards if that's what's blocked. And if suddenly there's a big gap and it's going to be 20 yards, he'll get that. And that's the boom nature of his game. But I don't feel like he's going to be the one to create those yards. So I felt like I rarely saw him take a 3 to 4 yard a carry and turn it into 6 yards. And that's what I like to see out of running back prospects. And that's the main reason I was kind of down on him.
Okay. We're going to stay with the running backs. I feel like we've not given the running backs a whole lot of time to talk here. We haven't given any time to talk about the running backs is what I'm trying to say. 14 running backs go in this draft. Out of 50 picks, only 14 of them are running backs. Jonathan Brooks goes in the first round. Jalen Wright, Trey Benson, Blake Corum in the second round. Allen, Will Shipley, Marshawn Lloyd, Estime in the third, Dylan Law, Bucky Irving, Jace McMillan in the fourth, and Isaac Arendo, Kamani Vidal, Ray Davis, and Frank Gore Jr., or the third. I can't remember which one he is, but regardless, in the fifth round. So everything pretty evenly spread, only one running back in the first round. Nate, I'm going to ask you a simple question, at least to start. I know you told me earlier you would prefer to talk about the lower end of the running backs, and we're going to spend some time doing that. Who are your current top 3 in this class, and how do we feel about the 4 guys who went in the first 2 rounds?
So my top 3, we've got Brooks, Corum, and Wright. And then right after that, which I'm surprised he didn't go in the second round, is Marshawn Lloyd. I just think the talent is exceptional there. What kind of shifted me was seeing him at the Senior Bowl and seeing him do the pass catching work that we just didn't see at USC. And he got some goal line work in at the Senior Bowl, which was something that he didn't do super well at USC. That could have been an offensive line issue. Could have been a lot of things because he did it well at the Senior Bowl. So that kind of tipped the scales for me, seeing him do the things we had questions about against elite talent all week long. Didn't play in the game, which is kind of a bummer, but those are really he's my number 4. So I've got Brooks, Corum, Wright, and then Lloyd, then Benson. And then from there, I mean, it kind of, I don't know. It's all one kind of mixed in tier for me of guys. I don't have anything that really separates the rest of them for me.
So they went in other than Benson sneaking in, they went in an order that is good for you. Austin, I know you're also high on Marshawn Lloyd. Lloyd goes as the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6th running back off the board, dead middle of the third round to our boy Kevin. So who are your current top three, and how do you feel about the guys who went in the first 2 rounds?
Yeah, so I'm not a big fan of the phrase do as I say, not as I do. But here's the deal. I have Marshawn Lloyd ranked where I could have taken him at the 2-1. If only Adonai Mitchell weren't there. I think I do have Mitchell ahead of Marshawn Lloyd. But I purposely was like, I'm not touching Marshawn Lloyd. I want to see how far he falls. And also, I don't want to make his ADP go up. I kind of like that I can get him in the 3rd round right now. So I wanted to see how that shook out. I do have Marshawn Lloyd as my number 1 running back. And then just behind him, I have Trey Benson. And for me, I have Jalen Wright get up into that number 3. And part of that's because of the speed there. He has the ability, to break away. You watch him break away from UGA defenders. That's a good sign. That's a good running back.
Jay is putting you on the spot here, Nate. He says his ranks are Brooks, Corum, and Wright, but then he mentions you took Benson, his RB1, over Corum in this specific draft. Well, what do you like about Benson over Corum in this situation?
You're going to have to ask Auto Pick.
Oh, that's right. So
I got autoed on that one.
Yeah, Nate
I would have taken Corum there.
I was gonna say you said it the other way around, so that explains. Okay, so there we go. That's a non-question. All right, so this is where I like to get into it. Nate, you mentioned you like some of the later running backs that in this draft because everybody spends a lot of time talking about the top. They don't spend a lot of time talking about the bottom. When you look at round 3 and round 4, there were some really big name running backs going off the board there. And even down into round 5, a lot of people are liking Arendo and Kamani Vidal right now.
Yep.
Of these guys that we saw go after round 3, who do you think should have been the first one off the board, or who do you think are the first couple that you like the most?
Well, I would have had Vidal off the board before Dylan Laube.
Okay.
But that said, I really like Dylan Laube, and I'm okay with him going in the 4th round. He's that white kid running back here. Like, he's really fast. Like, what's going on here? And then you see him in person, and you're like, oh, he is shifty and fast, and a really great kid with a really good head on his shoulders. He's likely going to find a team where I think he fits in as a special teamer at first. It's going to be kind of like a Terrell Davis, where it's like he made the Broncos because he was so adept at special teams. They had an injury in the backfield. Terrell Davis took over and never gave it back, right? That's what or Laube's a really good, like almost Aaron Jones type piece where you've got that 1A and 1B, and he's more of the pass catching back. He's really good in space, really good go route running back too, which is, again, something else I like about Blake Corum. Vidal, I just think is a grinder. I love watching him play. And the one guy that didn't come off the board that I'm kind of bummed about is Amani Bailey out of TCU. He's little. He's little. But the kid
is he Deuce Vaughn little?
He's 5'8".
Oh my, okay.
Yeah, no, he's tiny, but he was that guy where you watch his film and then you watch him practice, and he's just a grinder. He's not the biggest guy on the field, but he's so tiny and he's so stout. He slips through holes really well. He's hard to see for defenders. Guys that size don't generally work out, but he's someone I would be willing to take a 5th round flyer on here. I would have taken him over Frank Gore Jr.
Oh,
honestly.
Yeah. We've talked about this a few times on the show. McCaffrey, Gore, Rice. These guys are going based on name recognition. And until we see landing spots, there's a good chance they shouldn't be going at all. But we'll see where it all shakes out. But I completely agree with that. Austin, again, looking at these the running backs, I have seen drafts where Arendo, Vidal, and Ray Davis are above 4 of these other guys, especially after Estime had the bad combine, but he fixed it on his pro day. Are there any of these late guys that are kind of jumping off the page for you? Obviously, you love Marshawn Lloyd at the 25th overall pick, but even past Marshawn Lloyd, is some of this value? Is this where you would go in these later rounds? It's clearly not where you went in this mock draft.
Yeah, I think that's correct. The one of those guys that you mentioned that I love the value in this draft is actually Ray Davis. Some of this is a stylistic thing. I really love patient running backs, and this isn't patient like DeAndre Swift patient, where he does a bunch of fancy footwork and then cuts up the field. This is like following your blockers patient, like waiting for the gaps to open up. That's one of the skills that Ray Davis has that attracts me to him. That's also why I like Marshawn Lloyd. And then Ray Davis, he has the ability to cut up field once he gets out there. And another thing I like about him is kind of the the counterpoint to Blake Corum that we discussed earlier, but Davis will get his shoulder down to finish out plays, which enables him to get a couple extra yards on every play, which I really like. I have him ranked as my running back 5 in this class, so that would be a 3rd round grade in this draft. So getting him in the 5th round is super, super valuable to me.
So the elephant in the room with Ray Davis is he will be 25 during his rookie year. And I think that's rough for a dynasty running back. And I'm going to be perfectly honest. I haven't watched as much Ray Davis as I should, but I liked what I saw of him. But that age terrifies me, Austin.
Yeah. I mean, you had the COVID year. Also, running backs tend to last a year anyways at this point. Am I right?
Okay.
Like, if you're getting him in the 5th round, like.
And that's fair. So that kind of brings me to a question I wanted to ask here, Nate. So we talked about, if you're getting him in the 5th round, but the accepted knowledge of dynasty has been take wide receivers because they're going to last longer. It's a super deep wide receiver class. You guys both went wide receiver with your later picks. Where is the tipping point at running back versus wide receiver? Is it always the 5th round? Should it be the 4th round where like some of these highly rated and highly drafted running backs, and this could all change once we see draft capital, but some of these highly rated and highly drafted running backs are still falling to the 4th round. And at that point, I feel like there's a tier break where I should go running back, even though conventional wisdom is wide receiver.
It's all about how you feel about it. It's all about how you feel about how a draft is going. So something I do, rookie draft, startup draft, redraft draft, doesn't matter what it is. I don't ever go in with a draft strategy. I go in with the draft board of players I like, but I'm not going to force a strategy because a lot of times that just ends up screwing you in these drafts. You end up with players you didn't want. You end up reaching on guys because, well, it's my strategy. It's my strategy. So I've got to do this. It's all fluid for me. So that tier break for me, depending on how the draft is going, could come after the 2nd round where it's like, okay, it's time to start getting running backs because they're coming off the board faster than I thought, because that's how my league operates, even though it might not make sense. But typically in a normal league, I'd say after the 3rd round, generally that's when I kind of bail on anything perceived and just go with running backs, tight ends. Those are my tight end running back rounds.
Okay, so that's interesting.
My reach rounds.
Yeah, I was going to say, and it seems like, Austin, I mean, I think this is safe to say, it seems like there are more lottery tickets, certainly at running back, probably at tight end, than necessarily at wide receiver. We don't get Tank Dell and Puka Nacua every year. And the issue is because we got them last year, people are going to chase them this year. You went 5 wide receiver. You had the first pick. So you literally were dictating how every round was going to go. And you said there's going to be a blue block to start this draft. That's just how it's going to be. Are you opposite of Nate here? Would you rather have the lottery ticket at wide receiver, or was it that the value of these 5 specific guys were just too much for you?
Yeah, this is, again, do as I say, not as I do, because I was just trying to see
where this is what mock drafts are about, people. It's practice and looking for trends.
Yeah, and I wanted to see how far the running backs I liked fell. So similar to what Nate was saying, it depends on basically how I have them ranked. So Marshawn Lloyd, I do have him ranked ahead of Keon Coleman, but I wanted to see where he fell because it's a mock. If this was a real draft, I would have taken Marshawn Lloyd there. I would have had a really tough decision at the 2 pick, honestly, between him and Adonai Mitchell, just because of how I view the 2 guys. And then with my 5th round pick, I might have taken Rashee Ali, who we'll talk about later because he didn't even go in this draft, as someone I like as a dart throw. So it depends a little bit on where I have them ranked on how I feel about the running backs in general. I do agree, though, rounds 3 through 5, I tend to be way more willing to take the dart throws on the running backs and the tight end positions, particularly the running backs this year, because to me, it is honestly as much of a dart throw as all of these positions are. The running backs feel like the most likely candidates to actually get meaningful snaps at this point, right? Wide receiver is so deep. We talk about it every year when we do our ranking show. You can pick receivers that you like for like the first 50 wide receivers that come off the board in redraft leagues. And so it's actually getting to be a pretty crowded situation. Whereas running backs, it's kind of going the opposite direction. There's like 10 running backs that I feel solid about in redraft right now. So might as well take the dart throws on the running backs that are more likely to get 10 to 15 touches and score a touchdown compared to the receivers that, depending on where they land, they may be the wide receiver 4 on their team.
Nate, taking a look at rounds 3 and 4, and the reason I have you guys look at 3 and 4 is a lot of fantasy drafts stop after round 4. I always go to round 5 because I like to give you guys a chance to talk about guys who went really late that should have went earlier. You guys brought up Kamani Vidal. You both brought up running backs, Ray Davis, and 2 running backs you guys mentioned. I'll have you guys mention them again later on that weren't even drafted. But focusing specifically on rounds 3 and 4, Nate, are there any players that went here that should not have been drafted or at least should have fell to round 5? I'm asking you to go negative here. And you brought up some guys previously, but looking at these rounds, what I did find interesting is, if I did my math correctly, 8 quarterbacks go in this draft, and that includes Joe Milton, who I almost think Gator Raiders was just trolling you, saying that he's certainly not going to go in this draft, and then he does. But Michael Penix goes in round 3, and JT Sanders also goes in round 3. There's some debate around tight ends, and you mentioned you like Theo Johnson. So were there any players in 3 or 4 that you're willing to just flat out say should not be drafted, or at the very least should have fell into the final round of this draft?
So yes, Michael Penix is the first one here. That's egregious. Look, the dude's not going to start. He might not even be a day 2 pick. I know people are
so torn on Michael Penix.
They're so torn. It's 50-50. Here's what I'll tell you. This is what I see from Michael Penix. I see a guy who was pretty good at the college level, who was surrounded by talent and good coaching at Washington that made him look better than he actually was. His footwork is crap. His decision-making isn't great. He has hard time getting the ball down the field accurately. He's got a big arm, but he just doesn't get it down the field accurately. He does the short to intermediate stuff decently, but when he doesn't have protection, he makes big-time mistakes. And likely he's getting up on a team with a crappy offensive line, and probably not the starter, but if he does have to start, I mean, it's not going to be pretty. I don't think Bo Nix should be a 3rd-round rookie pick. I think he should be a 4th-round pick. He's going to be a starter immediately, and if he is, that's not going to be good for Nix. He's a tick better than Penix, in my opinion, but just like a tick. Spencer Rattler, I think, probably should be ahead of both of those guys in rookie drafts.
Interesting. I was going to bring up a comment from way earlier in the show. Randall says Bo Nix is dirt cheap on Underdog and real-time drafts right now as the 3rd or 4th quarterback in a late-round QB build. He thinks there's promise, but you're saying it's better for Nix not to start right away.
I don't think he should start right away. I don't think he's NFL ready. He does, again, much like Penix, he can get the ball downfield, but he's not really terribly accurate with it, and his decision-making is suspect. And those are 2 things at the NFL level we have seen take quarterbacks. Zach Wilson's got a strong arm, right? Kid's got a cannon. But is he accurate downfield? Not at all. And what's the biggest thing about Zach Wilson that concerns everyone? It's his decision-making on the field. Bo Nix and Michael Penix,
everything apparently.
Right. In the right situation, both of these guys could eventually be decent NFL quarterbacks. They're never going to be great. They'll be your QB2 in Superflex in a pinch. This is where these guys are going to land. So if you're taking them in the 3rd round, you better hope I'm really wrong. Otherwise, you have wasted major draft capital on 2 guys who aren't going to pay off. Outside of that, though, man, those are the 2 that are really egregious to me. Not a fan of them going in the 3rd round.
Yeah, I need to do a little bit more. I agree with both those names. I need to do a little more research into Jace McClellan. I don't know if I have him with a 4th-round grade yet. I'll have to go look at that. But Austin, same question. When you're looking at these guys, you obviously are a little bit more okay with quarterbacks than Nate and myself. How do you feel about Nix and Penix in that 3rd round?
Yeah, I completely agree with Nate on those 3 quarterbacks. I have those 3 all ranked outside of my top 50 overall, so I don't think they should be drafted in single quarterback leagues. Similar things that Nate said. Michael Penix, he's got a strong arm. He struggles under pressure. Bo Nix, he's not really creative. He's not on time all the time. Like, he might sit and develop, but I don't like him. Where I disagree with Nate a little bit is I'm way lower on Spencer Rattler. He is my 11th quarterback in this class.
Wow.
Now, let's be fair real quick. I watched him against Clemson, and South Carolina's offensive line was hot garbage in that game.
Yes.
But Rattler struggled to navigate the pocket during that time, and he also struggled at times pushing the ball down the field. So I think he sits. Those 3 guys, yeah, I'm not huge on them being drafted.
I'm with you on Rattler sitting. I just think there's more potential for Rattler. So if you're looking long term in these back end,
yeah,
I think Rattler's more coachable than Nix and Penix. I think that's what the biggest difference is for me. Rattler makes some really stupid decisions, but he's more coachable.
I think that's so fair. Getting away from the quarterbacks, though, the one that really stuck out to me outside of quarterback was Dylan Laub. I'm not a huge fan of him. He's a receiving only back in my mind. He didn't really seem to get too many rush attempts. So I'd rather take a flyer on him later. I have some other running backs that I like more than him.
Okay. I think that's fair. For anybody who was wondering, I hate any wide receiver that is below 5'10". So Malik Washington and what's the other kid's name? Jacob Cowling will not be on my draft board. So Malik Washington going in the 4th. Big bother for me. Not something I'm going to allow. Guys, this is just a quick answer, and then we're going to start getting into the draft breakdowns and, of course, my keep trade cut question. You both mentioned running backs that were not drafted, and I'll be honest, I didn't give you a ton of time to talk about them. We have heard in the 5th round, I like Horrendo. Nate, you brought up Kamani Vidal. Austin, you brought up Ray Davis. So we love these guys in the 5th, but you each brought up a running back who was not drafted. Nate, can you talk about that guy just a little bit more so people hear the name again?
So Amani Bailey out of TCU, I was just enamored with the kid's work ethic, his speed. What really got me, this is a fun story. So I'm going to tell you guys this about Amani Bailey real quick. At the actual Senior Bowl game, we were walking the main concourse at the end of the 4th quarter, and we stumbled on these people who had these like shiny sequin studded TCU Amani Bailey jerseys on. There was like 4 of them. So we're like, this has got to be his family, right? So we walked up and talked to him. So we've been watching him in practice all week and just been super impressed with his work ethic. And it was his mom, his grandma, his dad, and his nephew,
That's
I
awesome.
believe. And so we ended up talking to him for the remainder of the game. And I don't know if anybody watched the Senior Bowl, but Amani Bailey made a play at the end of that game. Spencer Rattler made a really dumb decision downfield. It got picked off with like a minute left in the 4th quarter. Dude picks it off. He's going to score. There's nobody in front of him. He's gone, right? Amani Bailey comes from 20 yards behind him, catches this cornerback at the 2-yard line, knocks him out of bounds, saves the touchdown.
Wow.
There was no reason that he had to do that. In the Senior Bowl, at the end of the Senior Bowl, a game that just simply didn't matter.
Yeah.
That kid's heart and hustle and watching him come down and do that, so it sold me on him like that. And he's a kid where he might even go undrafted, honestly. There's a chance he goes undrafted, but I think he's someone who can make an impact somewhere. Maybe as like a back-end flex, but he's a guy that I'd watch.
Well, we've seen UDFA running backs do it. Your story there reminded me of the most memorable and probably my favorite play in college football history. I'm an old guy. I'm an Ohio State guy, much higher stakes. Craig Krenzel threw an interception in the national championship game against Miami, and Maurice Claret ran the guy down and took the ball back from him to get Ohio State back possession, which led to them coming back and winning that game. So that's a memory.
I remember
That'll
that
stick
play
with me forever. So as you were describing the play, I'm just watching 13 from Ohio State yank that ball away. So thank you for that. That's a good way to handle your Saturday morning. Austin, I remember yours as Rashee Ali, and that's a guy you brought up last week as well. I just looked at our rankings. I have him at 14. You have him at 4. So there's some disparity there. I'm going to obviously need to watch Rashee Ali a little bit more. So talk to us about Rashee Ali.
Yeah, I mean, the thing I like about him primarily is his speed. And the thing that I mentioned last week, and I think is worth flagging with him, is just the injury concern. Like, he didn't participate in the Combine or the Senior Bowl. But I felt like he was always making the right read. He was getting upfield quickly, which is why I really liked him. And he's worth a flyer in these late rounds. The guy that I didn't mention, that there was another one that I liked that did not go in this draft, which was Daiwan Edwards from Georgia. I have him ranked as my RB8, and I was a little bit surprised he didn't go in this draft. To me, he's always making the right decisions. He knows where to go to find the holes, and he keeps his legs moving. He's got good contact balance. He might not be the most explosive running back in the world, but I like how versatile he is. He works inside, outside. So he's another one that I'm keeping an eye out on, depending on landing spot. And I think that will end up being the case with a lot of these running backs.
Perfect. Keep trade cut. I wanted to have a theme this week. I wanted to be a little different. So I'm going with the overshadowed wide receivers. These are guys where the first player from their own college team is getting a little bit more love than the second. And I want you guys to factor in cost here because it does matter because they all cost pretty wildly different. Keep trade cut, Austin, is Brian Thomas, Adonai Mitchell, and Jalen Polk. All guys who are coming from schools that have other more well-respected wide receivers in the draft. However, Brian Thomas is costing you a first. Adonai Mitchell is costing you a second. Jalen Polk is costing you a third. So with that value in mind, Austin, keep, trade, cut the overshadowed wide receivers.
Oh boy.
I thought you'd like this one. I know how you're going to answer it, by the way.
I'm going to answer this differently than I typically do. Typically, I try and solve for who I think has the most draft capital and the most trade capital, which in this case, I do think is Brian Thomas. But this week, I'm going to go with who I really want to keep. I want to keep Brian Thomas. I think he has really...
I would have thought you would have said AD all day. I was setting this question up for it, but go ahead.
I like the value there. I mean, I think in this draft in particular, Nate, I can't wait to hear you talk about Xavier Worthy over Brian Thomas, because I was certain Brian Thomas was going to be wide receiver 4. But no, I think he's the top of the second tier to me behind those top 3. And everybody was looking at Malik Neighbors, but Brian Thomas was executing really well down to down. I'm going to cut Jalen Polk just because I can't cut Adonai Mitchell.
I think that's fair. I think that's absolutely fair. I figured Polk is going to be the cut here, but just his low value, maybe you guys see him as the keep because you can get more from anyone else, but you're still going to cut Polk in this situation. So maybe this wasn't the greatest question, Nate, but it's on to you now. Brian Thomas, Adonai Mitchell, Jalen Polk, keep, trade, cut.
It's super boring because Austin took my answers. I'm with you. Like usually this would be a trade Brian Thomas because he's got the most draft capital, but I like the talent too much. Not as much as Xavier Worthy, but I like the talent too much.
I was going to say, let's get into that. We don't need to spend too much time. I will say I am always trade away the higher value guy, so I would trade away Brian Thomas. I would keep AD Mitchell, and I would also cut Jalen Polk. I knew Polk ruined this question, but I still went with it because it was the first thing I came up with. So, Nate, you do not have to talk about every pick. You can talk about what you want to talk about, what you don't want to talk about. But I think everybody wants to hear Xavier Worthy over Brian Thomas. You took Benson in the second round, Estime in the third, Theo Johnson in the fourth, though we have to remember some of those were auto picks. And then Luke McCaffrey, who you did take. I didn't even realize you took him when I was shitting on people with popular last names. But I think what everybody wants to know is Xavier Worthy over Brian Thomas and any other.
It's I don't know how to explain. It's a gut feeling, right? Like sometimes you just have those gut feelings where there's nothing quantifiable that tells you that Xavier Worthy is going to actually be better than Brian Thomas Jr. It's just a gut feel. So when I have those gut feelings, I tend to go with them. My gut told me Sam Laporta all day last season.
Well, congratulations
down on him, and I just went with it. So that's just one of those things. Like Worthy's talent is phenomenal, right? Where I really want to see him end up is in Kansas City.
Okay, I mean, I think that's.
I don't know that I don't think it's not going to happen. But
are we ever going to get tired of putting the fastest wide receiver in the world in Kansas City? Though I think that's what we
know. That is what we all want, because we all just want Tyreek Hill back in that system for fantasy, right?
100%.
So yeah, Xavier Worthy. And as far as we know, Trey Benson was the auto pick. Audric Estime, I like him. I would have preferred to have been able to take Marshawn Lloyd there. Kevin.
Marshawn Lynch would have been nice too.
Oh yeah, Marshawn Lynch would be great. Then Luke McCaffrey again. It just kind of came down to gut. I was on the fence between him and Cody Schrader out of Mizzou, and I just went with McCaffrey. And it's a little bit name recognition, right? Christian McCaffrey,
it is
McCaffrey, Ed McCaffrey. But also, to be fair, he grew up here where I live in Denver. So I saw high school. I've been watching these kids play. I've watched Christian McCaffrey play from the time he was a freshman in high school. He was always on the news and stuff. It's always a big story here. There's a lot of talent in this family, and Luke McCaffrey might be the most rawly athletic of all of the kids, which is high praise. Will that translate to the NFL? I don't know, because NFL teams aren't as high on him as they were on Christian, obviously.
Yeah.
And because he had to transfer to Rice to get playing time, which not necessarily a great look, right, for a wide receiver. But I still think there's a lot there. I think he fits in as kind of like a slot guy. You know, he's sneaky quick. He's not huge, but he's sneaky quick. And I like what McCaffrey brings to the table. So it was worth it to take a flyer in the 5th round on him. I figured, why the hell not?
Yeah, I like that you said NFL teams may not be as high. I think it was Jeremy last week with us, Austin, who said, if the NFL likes him, I'll like him more. So that's where draft capital is going to play into a lot of these guys. And Austin, as I mentioned earlier, you know the rules. You talk about whoever you want or however many you want. You started with the sea of blue, all wide receivers in this draft.
Yeah, and that was mostly just because I wanted to see where some of these running backs fell. As I mentioned, I would have taken Marshawn Lloyd with my 3rd pick and probably someone like Rashee with my 5th pick. But I wanted to touch briefly on Marvin Harrison, just to say that in contrast to Nate, I'm not worried about his landing spot. In the spirit of what you just said, Ryan, of like, I'm going to let the NFL tell me what they think. He's going in the top 5. And I think no matter what, like, I feel good about how he's going to pan out in the NFL. I've talked a lot about Adonai Mitchell. I really like him. I think he's been overshadowed by the more flashy Texas receiver, but I think Adonai Mitchell has a better chance of being more consistent. He's a good route runner. He can get downfield. Keon Coleman, again, I would have taken Marshawn Lloyd there if this were a real draft. But as far as the ranking goes, I do like Keon Coleman a lot, mostly because he can high point balls really well.
I was going to say, the big advantage to your team is if you put Keon Coleman on Johnny Wilson's shoulders, you have a 12'11" human being who can just do anything.
Yes, that is very true. Johnny Wilson, basically a tight end. So, it's fun to take a little splash on a receiver that's going to be essentially tight end body towards the end. And then Malachi Corley, he's one of I'd say the biggest projections that I took out of these players, because he played in Western Kentucky. Yeah. It was a rough situation, not great quarterback play, not great anything play, except for Malachi Corley. But I felt like watching him, like, he has good route running ability. So I'm very curious what he will be able to do with an NFL caliber quarterback.
And there you go. That's why they made the picks they did. I'm going to go ahead and get the draft off of the screen, and we're going to get everybody out of here in just a second. However, we have a question that I think is a good question to ask. I was actually listening to Bob Harris from Football Guys this morning. He was talking about Rashee Rice, and he said in an ambiguous situation like this, maybe it's best just to stand pat, because you just don't know what's going to happen. And he also brought up that when people bought the dip on Tyreek Hill, a little bit different situation, but when people bought the dip on Tyreek Hill during his legal troubles, paid off very, very big for them. Rashee Rice is not Tyreek Hill, but Rashee Rice does play with Patrick Mahomes. So on top of, do you guys think his stock continues to drop? Let's say he gets a 3-game suspension, and then in Dynasty, a 3-game suspension is a drop in the ocean. I think he's a buy at that point if someone's willing to sell, Nate.
Yeah, no, I'm buying. I don't know if you guys follow Drew Davenport on Twitter. If you don't, guys, he's a phenomenal legal resource, okay? And essentially how he laid this out yesterday was Rashee Rice has never been in trouble before. He has a clean record. He turned himself in. He admitted to being the driver. The counts look really serious, but in these situations, he's going to plead down to a couple of misdemeanors. He might get a 2-game suspension. He's not going to do any time unless something drastically changes. There were no guns, as initially reported. There were bags full of drugs, as initially reported. So I would buy the dip. At this point, if his value starts to dip because people aren't listening to the actual legal advice that's out there of what's really going to happen to him, buy it. Because I've been high on Rice since about midway through last season when he really started to take hold in that offense. And he proved me right, man. The guy's ultra talented. We all make really stupid mistakes. Fortunately, nobody got hurt. Hopefully he learns from it and thrives in this offense. And that's what I see happening. So I'm buying right now.
Yep. I am in agreement. I've been high on Rice since the day the Kansas City Chiefs called his name, because I am a sucker for any wide receiver playing with Patrick Mahomes. I was a Mecole Hardman guy. Didn't really work out for me. Austin, same question. How are you handling Rashee Rice? It's kind of hard for us to answer how low is his stock going to go, but I guess, do you see things getting worse?
I do. I mean, it could get worse. I think first you have the obligatory, like, pick guys that you want to pull for. And if you still want to pull for them, great, like, go for it. Like, it's meant to be fun. It's hard for me to analyze the situation itself. I think I did, I haven't dug into it deeply. I did see there were some serious injuries of some of the folks who were involved in the accident.
One of the charges is serious bodily injury, and then 6 charges of, I didn't really call it minor bodily injury, but there are 6 charges of minor bodily injury and 1 charge of serious bodily. The thing is, we don't know what that means because we're not lawyers.
Right. So. Right. And I think you get the cynical side of me right now. It's the Kansas City Chiefs. There's a reason that Tyreek Hill was okay.
That's true.
Kansas City had his back. They eventually, the only person they didn't have his back was Kareem Hunt. And
they booted
pretty hard to have his back.
Yeah.
So I think there's part of me that's like, he probably gets a little suspension.
That's a good point. Where Tyreek Hill, there was obviously, child involved, and I'm not going to get into all the part of it, but Kansas City backed Tyreek Hill. Kansas City did not back Kareem Hunt. They are backing Rashee Rice, which probably means he's going to be fine.
Yeah. I would say his fantasy stock to me has declined from the football perspective, though, just because there's more weapons in that offense for him.
More weapons, and now you have to question his decision making a little bit, no matter how you want to cut it.
Yeah.
Bad decision making. Yeah. No, I think that's fair, guys. Thank you so much for drafting with us. Nate, please let everybody know once again where they can find whatever you're working on.
Oh, the best place to find me is right here on my Twitter at Nate Polvogt. You can find me on Razzball. You can find me on Fantasy Pros. Got a couple articles here coming up the next week and two, and that's about it for now. So just follow at Nate Polvogt on Twitter, and you'll get all my fun updates.
Austin.
Yeah, same deal. Follow me at Austin_FFL on Twitter and Instagram. And you can catch my content at Club Fantasy FFL, which you're here. So hit that subscribe button. And also catch all my Carolina Panthers coverage at Last Word on NFL.
I kind of forgot to do the oops of the draft because I'd mentioned it earlier in the draft. It's 3 quarterbacks in round 1 of a single QB league. Caleb Williams belongs in round 1. I don't even agree with Nate that Jaden Daniels does. I'm not touching any other quarterback outside of Caleb Williams in round 1, and you shouldn't either. So that's my oops of the draft. Guys, make sure you're following Club Fantasy. I see a bunch of new faces. I see a bunch of people watching us on YouTube right now. Click the damn subscribe button if you haven't done it already. We're working our way towards 1,000. It costs you absolutely nothing. I don't care if you mute notifications from us. Just click the subscribe button and help us out. We do 2 mock draft shows every week. This show, 11 a.m. on Saturday, and on Monday nights at 10 p.m., Chris and Jay host Mocking with the Stars. This week, they invite our own Josh Hudson to do a Superflex rookie mock. So you've now done your 1 QB. Come back and do the Superflex. On every Wednesday, we have our flagship show, No Punt Intended, and we are finishing up our Stars of Tomorrow series with the rookie tight ends. It's going to be Jeremy. I'm going to try to pronounce his last name. I looked it up. It's Populars, but it's Popes FFH. He was with us. He works with FTN. And we should see Joe Zolo back this week. Congratulations to Joe and Maggie Zolo, who were wed yesterday. So we should actually see him back this week and have me, Josh, and Joe with Jeremy on that show. Every Sunday, if you're looking for more Dynasty content, we have a Dynasty show called Dynasty After Party, hosted by Joel Wirth and Michael Sicoli. They'll be talking the tight ends this week as well. And then every Wednesday morning, we even have golf. Kelly Singh and Adam Hallis give you Who's Your Caddy, where they're going to talk golf DFS with you. Basically, we have you covered no matter what your degeneration is, and we're here to help you out and try to hopefully make you some money and have some fun. And when it comes to fantasy sports, so just go ahead and hit that subscribe button. We'd very much appreciate it. Always remember, defense wins championships. Offense wins fantasy football, and practice makes perfect. We will see you at the next mock draft.